Okay. So welcome to those who just came in. I think it's really strange for us to be doing this late in December. We had several intensives as well that were happening near Christmas, and it's a little bit of a challenge for people to show up. But people are watching the call, so it's great that we can record and keep these for posterity. Today feels important for me. It's hard to bring things into a wholeness without going through a lot of different parts. And sometimes in community, it's rather important that we share similar terms, similar understandings. So in a way, we all hold a part of the whole. So today we're going to go into really interesting topic called hermeneutics. I'm just using that as an intro. Application, okay, so this is from yesterday. Let's erase that. So what is hermeneutics? It's an interesting word. This could be like entirely a complete thing. It could be a person, it could be an idea. And then what comprises you or a concept or an idea are different parts, you know, there are different things in there that are all relevant. So in a way, how do we come to understand anything? The Hermeneutic Circle describes the way we understand anything by journeying through the many parts to comprise the whole. But it's actually very hard to understand any of the parts without understanding the whole. So especially within an inner dance process, there's so much wholeness in the energy. But then when you journey through the energy, there's so many parts of it. There's so many different sensations, feelings, so many images, so many sounds. There's so many parts. Like, how many parts are actually there? So basically you need both. You need to understand the gist, the gestalt, the whole thing. And that helps you to understand the relationship between like the different parts. So I'm not sure if there's a better image to understand that than this thing that we used to do as kids. You know, I think it's really important that we do puzzles. I think life is a puzzle. Every day you deal with so many parts. Parts could be people, parts could be places, parts could be the many ideas in your head, and all the time you're putting the pieces together, and in a way you're just a part, you're just a piece, but at the same time you're also the whole thing. So you're learning to unravel, and I think there are many ways to understand the parts and the wholes. So hermeneutics, hermeneutics basically is an idea or a movement or a system that began when humans evolved to have more access to parts and the whole. In a way, that is something that came about through different mediums. So, for example, when we discovered writing or digital technology or thought, this is thought, or speech. There are different ways of coming into parts and wholes depending on the dimension that you're working with. So here, put this interesting thing that could be regarded as biblical. So we used to write in stone, and then we learned how to write on paper to establish print, and now we're writing on different kinds of tablets, not just stone tablets, but like digital tablets, digital notebooks, meaning we're writing in electricity. Something happened to our brains when we learned to do that. And I think a lot of people are right now learning to write and read the energy. It's very different to write on the pages of energy and to read the written elements in energy. So there's an evolution whenever we come into different mediums. We've talked quite a bit about these in the last Zoom calls, primarily because it's really important to understand inner dance is a medium, and a medium is a dimension. So hermeneutics has a history. It started with religion initially first, when we became interested in meaning and we realized that we don't know how to interpret meaning. So you could be reading a book, watching a movie. How do you know what is good and what is not so good? How do you know what is beautiful and what is ugly? Who is to say? Is there a system that allows us to hold parameters for interpretations? And so right now, this becomes so valuable considering just the amount of information being accumulated on so many mediums out there. People have lost an ability to interpret just because of the overwhelming amount. So in some ways, energy actually brings about a possible system of interpretation. There's something intuitive about that system that allows you to feel. It's something to do with the whole body. It's something to do with the movements, the dance. It's something to do with reading the room, just going into higher sensitivity as you explore the nature of the senses of sound, of image, of movements. So in a way, you're becoming a hermeneuticist. You're learning to not just interpret meaning, you're actually also learning to interpret how meaning is made. I want to watch a video. Let me just check I'm gonna make sure this work. I think VLC, yeah. Let's watch a short video. It's just a few minutes, and this features Tom first went into inner dance in 2012. I want to put two people together here, Tom and Clara. They're very close. They met in Palawan. And I want to look at this video later on as well, seeing as you might have developed after this Zoom process, a way of understanding parts and wholes, dimensionalities, and mediums. Okay, just kind of watch or feel into differences as to where people are coming from when they're like coming from their own inner dance. Is it all the same, or are there subtle differences in the way they're sensing and recognizing the space and themselves?
The body's like a hard drive. We're accessing the information in the body and in the bones. And then the messenger came. The messenger grew. The messenger turned around, and it was me. And he said, "Come on, I'll show you." I showed me these mountains, these hills, and in the hillside was buildings like cut into the mountains or into the hills. And this expression, this flow meets form kept coming up. The birth vision was becoming superhuman, and how to teach that, how to put that out into the world. Becoming superhuman, how to use this mind, this body to observe its highest potential through these kinetic movements. And the way to do that, after achieving that kind of kinetic flow in the body, is architecture and functional art. Art that serves a purpose, that passes on this message, that facilitates the teaching of the art of living. And from then on I saw the school. It's too much to describe.
There should be a dojo there, of course.
Yeah, there's loads. There's shalas and dojos and all kinds of places to practice these things in this huge, amazing garden in the middle that's the center of everything. And I can't describe it yet. I need to find a big patch of sand that I can build it out of. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
I think your hands were around my head, and I just felt this buzz. There's just so much coming from your hands, and then for the first time ever, I heard so many things.
Wow.
I always see things, but I've never heard anything before. It was just amazing. And then when you said that your hands are ears, and I started turning, just like a transistor or something. I just got all this kind of
That's funny
sound.
you said eyes.
Yeah, it was quite amazing.
That's new.
That's very new. So much sound, so much. It's like, whoa. Very amazing.
W-O-W.
Okay, so I'd love to talk about that. I'm bringing that up partly as Dom introduces his inner dance with talking to the messenger. Hermeneutics is derived from the name of the messenger of the gods. For those who know Hermes, we want to understand, like, who is the messenger, who is receiving the message, what is the message, what are the dimensions in which the messages are coming through. So we're going to dive into different ways of seeing, hearing, listening to others. So wait, let me just do some housekeeping. So how do we see? How do you see things? Do you use your eyes to see things, and when you close your eyes, sometimes you see things? Clara in that video is starting to hear things, but in a way she was actually also seeing the sound. So you'll notice something very interesting here on this reptile. I don't actually know what kind of animal this is, but amphibious creatures have this really curious thing that looks like the third eye. In a way, it actually is the literal third eye. This is, it's called the parietal eye. Parietal I. Um, Going back to Descartes, whom we went into last week, Descartes did mention something really cool, that he believed that there was this thing buried deep in the brain that was possibly the third eye. The pineal gland was so deep within our brain that he felt this is the third eye. But when you look at amphibious creatures, it's pretty literal. Like when you think of it, there's an actual photoreceptor. It's supposed to be atrophied so that they're not really receiving sunlight there. But I think that's under debate. So in a way, some of you might have felt your own parietal eye. When you talk about ancestors, you don't have to talk about your cultural ancestors. This is just as much your ancestor as, the other humans that came before you. So I think we're learning to see differently. And when you go back to your reptilian brain, you would also access a third eye technology, which provides another kind of hermeneutics. Another one of our ancestors is the fish. So what's different about this is it looks at the auditory cortex from a very, very different space. The fish has this thing called the lateral line. So in a way, how do you hear? How do you listen? You absorb these mechanical waves from the environment, and it enters through your ear, goes into your ear, and then somewhere around the eardrum is the cochlea. So there are these fine hairs that interpret the sound, so that even as you're receiving the sound that I'm creating now, you're creating meaning, you're signifying meaning out of it. In that same strange way, the ears actually do it with their whole body. So this is something for you to meditate on. When people receive sound, not just through the ears, when they're starting to listen to it with the whole body, right? That's one of the questions that eventually pops up. Especially, let's say you have participants who are kind of deaf, who can't actually hear. So learning to position the speakers, learning to understand the proprioceptive power of receiving sound. It's almost like the whole body becomes the whole ear. And I think that's where Clara was coming from. So that the body going horizontal also has the kind of lateral line. You can imagine why fish needed to heighten their body-ear sensitivity. When you're in water, you can't actually hear sound in the same way as when you're experiencing it as it travels through air. So in a way, when you're becoming like the fish, even like the dolphin or the whale, it has also different ways of hearing the sound. I think those are really just interesting to think about. We're learning to echolocate. I think this is going to keep being interesting. What is your sonar, your sonic Flores in this call, your sonic alchemy? What is your sonic echolocation? Dolphins have a much higher brain capacity than humans, and it seems like when you raise your brain capacity, your ability to vibrate higher, you have this ability, dolphins, whales, bats, some insects do, so that they can transfer sound into image. Isn't that what we're doing in inner dance? We're using sound and then the images come. So in a way, we are heightening your brain capacity, and that has to do with activating your lateral line, not just your echolocating brain. So that's just a portent of where we're headed. You're becoming this, you're also becoming that. You're not just learning to, for the first time, walk on land, you're going back to the water in a way. Synesthesia, we can go into today. A lot of people have questions on the senses. What are the senses and how do they come together? I wonder what this circle is. So that's too soon. It's hard to navigate when it's in that mode. Okay, so let's see. We're going to define inner dance today rather integrally, integratively, like holistically. What is inner dance? Why does it happen? How does it work? Why does it happen? Not just how. It has something to do with the process of reflecting. It has something to do with the mirror. So here we look at the mythology of Narcissus and Echo. I find this to be such an amazing myth. It's such an amazing story. So as we've talked about him a lot, Narcissus was the one who fell in love with his image. And he couldn't get away from looking at the mirror. The mirror back then was water, so he just kept there in the river, not eating, not really taking care of himself. So what I find interesting is the woman who fell in love with him was Echo. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Echo. Echo was a water nymph, and through a series of events, she was basically cursed by the gods so that she cannot speak anything original. She can only echo the things that she hears from others. So if you have a conversation with Echo, say hi, and then she would say hi. Say, how are you doing? She can only say, how are you doing? I'm good. And she say, I'm good. Okay, like, so I think there's a mystery in Narcissus and Echo, in their story, that holds both the image and sound. What is it inside the story that talks about energy, the mind, consciousness, senses? What is the mirror neuron? The mirror neuron is a really interesting cell in your brain that activates whenever you're doing an action or when you're watching someone performing the action. So when you watched the video featuring Tom and Clara, you were basically activating parts of your brain that are pretending that you yourself are doing the inner dance. That's happening in so many meta levels because the inner dance is in fact the activation of many mirror neurons, all of which are, it's like holding a mirror that's able to look at another mirror, that's able to look at another mirror. And the deeper you go, you basically start reflecting mirrors upon each other until you see like these infinite echoes and infinite images all reflecting each other. So in a way, this is something that we evolved with. Like, we could not have become humans without creating this capacity to mirror. And this is first discovered in the macaque monkey. The urban myth has it that when these neuroscientists in Parma, Italy, were learning to isolate the observation of single neurons in the brain. It was almost accidental when one of them had gone out for lunch and came back and was eating. It's really confusing because there are stories where the scientist, I think it was Rizzolatti, was eating peanuts. Some versions have it that he was eating a banana. Some people say he was eating ice cream. Suddenly, while the monkey was watching the scientist eating, let's say, the banana, the part of the brain that would normally activate when the monkey itself is eating the banana lit up. And so they heard the clacking noise that establishes that that thing is lighting up, and they were really confused. They didn't know what this was. They kept on going into experimentations, and then they realized that there's a connection between action and perception in the brain, that somehow you cannot separate these two senses together. And that has really done quite a lot in so many sciences. So that the mirror neuron now seems to explain all of these interesting, deep concepts. Like, how do we learn? How do we become aware of ourselves? How are we able to come into language in a way that many animals are not? What is empathy and love? And the theory of mind is basically one's ability to understand how another person's consciousness is operating. So if you were to interrelate with someone, you need at least a basic theory of how this person's mind is working. And that requires reflection. That requires a kind of mirroring process. I feel the mirror neuron explains inner dance really well, and would love to go into a conversation in that today. The mirror neuron also expresses an understanding of light language a lot. Why? It's because a lot of the mirror neurons are actually hiding or are situating in the Broca's area, which is in the premotor cortex in the left hemisphere of the brain. So let me explain that. The Broca's area is named after the neuroscientist or psychologist Paul Broca, and he was the one who discovered that language production happens here. So the fact that mirror neurons are also happening here, when electricity then surges through the corpus callosum and enters into the language areas, when we experience light language, there's a different kind of mirroring happening. How you could see it is you're either disrupting the mirroring process or you're going into an even deeper reflexivity. Inner dance isn't so much mapping inner dance as opposed to light language. Light language happens here. Inner dance happens normally when electricity is sent forth between the hemispheres, which is separated by this fissure called the corpus callosum, then allowing the energy to spread out, so that when it starts to awash here, light language happens. But when the body goes into these different states, that's more of a bigger spread. Like, in a way, I think that's interesting too.
Are we supposed to be seeing like an image, like a brain image?
Yes, sorry. Wait. Yeah, I think I should just stop going back to my image. Okay, so these were the images that are now not recorded live. So I took that out first so that I could go into these, and then inner dance, light language. So this is Broca's area. This is the premortar cortex. The mirror neurons are still a little bit scattered throughout the brain, but a big part of them are located here. This is the premortar cortex, which is in the frontal lobe, and there's quite a bit of them that can be found here in the temporal lobe. Okay, so this is what I was explaining around the corpus callosum and the hemispheres. Okay, so in yesterday's call, I went into this. Not everyone is in that, and this is important. So what is the mu wave? This has been talked about in inner dance training since 2011. We've been looking at this interesting wave that is not delta, it is not theta, alpha, beta, gamma. So what is the mu wave? The mu wave is being implicated in the mirror neuron. So I think I need to draw this out. So the mu wave basically operates almost the same as the alpha wave. I think alpha is somewhere around 7 to 12 hertz. That's where it operates. Mu would be around 7.5 to 12.5 hertz. So in a way, okay, what's the point? That they're actually the same hertz levels, the same frequency, same wavelengths. They're not the same because they don't look the same. And more importantly, they're not the same because they're operating in different parts of the brain. The alpha wave is operating somewhere within the occipital lobe, which, as many of you know, is where images are happening. And then the mu wave is happening in the space between your ears. Okay, so that's somewhere near the auditory cortex and the motor cortex. So what this brings together somehow is this is to do with sound, and this is to do with the image. So looking at the mu wave and the mirror neuron, there's actually an explanation of inner dance here. So normally when you're awake, the mu wave can be active or it can be suppressed depending on what's happening. So if you are resting, let's say resting and not moving, the mu wave is, alpha is happening, and as I said, the occipital lobe, as is the mu wave. There's a movement from alpha to mu in inner dance. I need to do some calisthenics here. It's hard to describe, but we need to bring up examples. So when you're moving, let's say when there's a person moving and is not at rest, the mu wave is suppressed. Okay, so you suppress the mu wave, and the mirror neurons then are desynchronized. Are synchronized, like in a way. The mirror neurons are activated. But there needs to be a mu wave suppression. Now, this is the case in point for most people, except for some special people who have been observed who don't suppress the mu wave while movement is happening or while they're watching someone else move. And I'll write this down. Instantly you will have a recognition of what this has to do with inner dance. Autistic children and some adults in the autistic spectrum disorder have this ability of not suppressing mu, that in fact they activate mu even while there's action taking place. So in a way, mu holds a particular possible capacity to hold more. So it's almost like being very visual creatures. When we developed our visual cortex, especially when we learn how to read and write, it's almost we learned how to suppress a very old, more vibratory wave that has more to do with sound and motoric function functions. Yeah. So yeah, how mirroring happens when there's activity. The mu wave is suppressed, and when we're resting, the mu wave does wake up. So something you're doing in inner dance is you're allowing the mu wave to activate even when this is happening. And that basically could bring about an expression or an explanation of how inner dance is happening. You're breaking some kind of conditioning of the body that's been suppressing, and in a way you're bringing about a kind of hyper sensitivity for which autism is known for. Autistics have supposedly different processes to do, especially with like empathy. They have a hard time relating with other people. They have a hard time with language very often. They don't really have a problem with this. They can hold on to a lot more information than we can, like in many ways. So, like, we can talk about the mu wave and mirror neuron more as we explore, yeah, just different elements that are, yeah, within what we can look at today. So, gating, right? What is latent inhibition? For those in yesterday's call, we brought this up, and for those on this is really kind of important. So latent inhibition is that which prevents sensory overload. It is a gating mechanism that helps our consciousness to filter out all of the incoming stimuli that otherwise would overwhelm our minds. It's basically the filtration mechanism. So inner dance as a technology is that which lowers latent inhibition, therefore opening the gating mechanisms that usually inhibit the stimuli. Okay, so latent inhibition is useful. It's something that we need, otherwise we would experience this heightened sensitivity like all the time. You know, you would have like this super hearing, super seeing, super feeling, super smelling. So in order to allow you to operate, starting from when you were young, you actually had to build strong boundaries. You had to create these walls that would filter out the stimuli. So inner dance, in a way, is a way of lowering latent inhibition. How does that happen? It's been observed for a while now that when you raise dopamine, latent inhibition goes down. We've talked about this in the Zoom calls, but it might be useful to look into it today. When dopamine goes into the striatum, right? Instead of the addiction reward centers to do with memory, attention, emotion, and motor functions. When we reroute dopamine, whenever something unexpected is happening, dopamine goes here. And usually when dopamine goes there, that's actually when latent inhibition goes down. That's when we experience low latent inhibition. So in a way, this acts as the gating mechanism of the brain. So yeah, so when that happens, there is a hyperpriming. So let's say these are different neurons, different brain cells, and then suddenly there are ways they start to interconnect with each other, where the interconnections might have been more direct, instead of going direct from just this one strictly goes to here. There's a hyper priming. So priming is a way in which images, sounds, and words start to associate with each other. So in a way, when you go through a spiritual experience, there are a lot of images. It's called the iconic, the echoic, and the semantic. You start to see more. There are more connections when you go into a hyperpriming, as opposed to when there's just a direct priming happening. So in this way, the use of dopamine initially allows the interconnections to take place. That's just one of the first elements that happens. So we're learning to lower latent inhibition. In that way, semantic priming starts to spread out more. So we want to implicate some other neurotransmitters that play key roles that counteract or counterbalance dopamine. So we have to establish that when you activate dopamine, you actually very often inhibit glutamate. Okay, dopamine can have energetic spiritual functions. Glutamate and GABA are more interested in learning, like processing information in the more long-term basis. So when you want to learn, when you want to retain information, dopamine is not always going to do it for you. Dopamine can open the floodgates, but if you want to go into a learning process, glutamate and GABA are really important. And glutamate and GABA are to play key roles in the production and proliferation of myelin, which brings about long-term ways of establishing hyper and direct priming. What is myelin? So let's say this is a neuron with the dendrites, and then here's the axon, and then the connections between each neuron happens to, let's say these are the dendrites of the other neuron, and this is the axon. This is a synapse. It's where dendrites and axons would connect through a small gap. You know, this is where signals pass through. So myelin would be it's like this protective sheath. It's called the myelin sheath. It is that which allows the signals to pass through a lot faster. So neurons that don't have the myelin sheath tend to have damaged ways of interconnecting with other neurons. I think I put an image here somewhere. So this is a healthy neuron, and this is a damaged neuron in a way that the myelin is kind of damaged. So I think what this talks about is when we when we keep doing this, a lot of people really like the intense process, the intense journey, the intense activation. You just keep raising dopamine levels, raise dopamine levels, so that the latent inhibition, which is kind of like the mind, I want the mind to shut off. I want to stop thinking. I want to just feel my emotions. I don't want to, be aware. I want to numb myself. I don't want to see anything. I don't want to think of anything. I just want to keep raising dopamine, which in a way creates addiction. That's when like myelin does not, it doesn't proliferate. It doesn't allow for a long-term hyperdirect priming to take place. So this is what you want to take care of. It's a protective layer. It creates the boundary for transmissions to happen much, much more effectively. So it is for this reason that we have been sharing techniques and ways in which people aren't using sounds and music that's really just too much into this dopamine raising process. And this is a big invitation to establish learning capacity and not just an addiction to the spiritual high. That's why this is important to bring up. What else is here? Okay, so I think now I can go into this. Containment and continuity are words that I have to actually keep holding inside myself. They're all across my many notebooks. Okay, contain, because when I'm not containing, I just explode. I need like safe containers to hold me in a kind of womb process. Sorry about this thing. You can probably see it too. Continuity would be to establish continuity of connections. So in a way, when you're living in the world, it's very easy to get distracted, and it's not easy anymore to hold a continuity. I think though, when we understand hyperpriming from like a much bigger, vast range, we're looking for a higher or much more interdimensional sense of continuity. So sometimes when you do get distracted, there is some deeper continuity that takes place. And I'm sure a lot of you have noticed that sometimes to learn, you need to be doing several things at the same time. When you try to go into a direct learning experience, oftentimes you're unable to establish like greater connections. So in a way, just greater priming. Priming, as we mentioned, is a way of associating different bits of information with other bits of information. I hold these three words a lot as well in my own space. There's so much information, and when I listen to people, all of these are usually at work, but some people have more dominance in the way they hold content as opposed to context and how they hold code. I think an oversimplified way of understanding this is when you have a lot of content, like floating around the space. You must have the ability to contain all of that. So if this is, let's say, content, when you put all of that content together, that becomes the context, So when you go into dialogue, when you go into explorations of your own thoughts, you are developing the ability to contextualize what you're seeing, what you're thinking, what you're hearing. Sometimes when an inner dance process is happening, people really get interested in the content. Say, oh, okay, I saw this image, or I saw this thing. Sometimes that doesn't actually matter as much as the content, the context upon which there's something much, much deeper happening. So what we're working on, and this is one of the reasons why we're exposing you to so many different facets, so many different angles of vision of inner dance, is that when the mind goes into deeper dimensions, you go into many contexts. So this could be a psychological context, for example. This could be a philosophical, neurological, linguistic set of contexts. It's your ability to hold all of these contexts together. You know, you can contain all of these that you start to establish the code. You know, like how does this work from like an even bigger circle, an even bigger field. So this is in many ways what you're developing, or that's what I'm hoping anyway, that after our time together, you're not just going to be able to hold a lot of content, but that when you listen to the experiences, when you listen to the energy, when you listen to your own body, mind, spirit, you're able to contextualize how all of these are interconnected with each other in either chaos or either in some kind of mandala formation. And then you go even deeper into that so that you can hold more and more and more of the meta structure of things. You know, that your content can often be very personal, can be very individual, very much like you. Content can be very much like cultural, societal, belongs to the understanding of the group. And code can be very much like planetary, can be very much universal. It could be very much not just the things that you're interested in, but what all humans would be very, very interested in. In a way, this is one way of understanding the Hermeneutic Circle. Like, for you to understand this whole thing, it means you actually do need to understand these other small, tiny things. Like here, like your mind. This is your mind, and it's filled with all of these different concepts, contents, and every time you hear and absorb anything on a daily basis, you like each of these could be in fact a complete bubble, containing complete code unto itself. But at the same time, it is content. It is a word. It is an image. It is a sound. So when you go into the energy process, this is the training. The whole is operating just as much as the pieces or the parts are also being honored, being validated, being looked at, being seen, being observed. So I guess from like a, you know, like brain state level, being able to hold delta, and then high oscillating frequencies, gamma, beta, alpha, and theta. When you can conduct a cross frequency coupling, when you can hold the super slow and the super fast. I tap it with my pen. Sorry. There's this button on my pen, and when I press it sometimes, it does funny things. When you can hold slow and fast together, it's actually a way to hold this could be, yeah, like a lot of content, and this could be like slowing down so that you can see the code holding contexts and content together. In the long term, this is where time and space come in, space and time. That when we looked at aphasia in a way. There are different, aphasia can happen within time, which is context. And when you go into space, that's code. So it's very important that when you experience the inner dance, aphasia, or light language, there are these different inner dances that you're able to establish. So when you perform things too much in time, that's a lot in contextualization, and you're lacking space. So you need to then create inner dances that holds more of like space. We could look at that today because there was a question from Sophie on how to use some of the apps. Yeah, so let's go back. So association, I think I was working on this in the last minute, so I don't have anything here. How do we associate? So, okay, when you hear a word, then you start to think of words that are associated to it. When someone says food, then it says, oh yeah, I'm hungry. And then does your mind go to pizza, tacos? And then after you're done eating, you'd still go into associations that are related to what was happening in the previous hour or previous hours. So that could have to do with, let's say, different types of memories. The working memory is kind of a short-term memory, just like sensory memory, remembering what your senses were telling you. And then when you go into long-term memory, like episodic memory, episodes that happened in the past. Semantic memory would be your lexicon, your vocabulary of everything you've processed or stored that holds meaning. Procedural memory would be like how things operate. When the body moves in inner dance, you're actually activating a lot of these. So when you know how to hold the energy, using sound or using the way you touch people, and then using words, what are you activating? Because when you're merely going into sensations, sometimes long-term types of memories won't really come up. So when you hold, let's say, more delta states, which mimics low-wave sleep, that's where shorter memory is actually shifting or being transduced into long-term memory. So sometimes people will access the super duper long-term memory when you hold, let's say, like deep space. Language functions is important. Let me draw this out a little bit. This is something I used to really go into. It's by Jacobson. So we're talking about the message. When we watched the video featuring Tom, you're really interested in the message for its own sake. What's the point? What's the meaning? But something needs to carry the message. So that's called the medium. These are what are needed for a communication to happen, right? So there has to be the messenger, but the messenger is very different from the one who created the message. And then someone needs to receive the message that is sent. So these are the functions of language. Jacobson added to these context and code. Okay, so why I'm drawing this out is when you are holding the space, you might be coming from any of these various functions. I think if you wanted to complete this, there needs to be like a feedback mechanism. And what's happening in our journeys right now is we're not even sure who is the sender or the receiver anymore. But anyway, these different functions are going on all at the same time, yet they're independent from each other. So facilitators that are very intent on themselves, like what is important is me, the one holding the space. I am the master, the guru, I'm the teacher, I'm the healer. I am the most important. So for some, that's not really the most valuable. What is important is what is the content, what is the thing that is being held that needs to be looked at, that isn't as important as this or this. Okay, now people who are really people pleasing, and are always worried about others before they worry about themselves, they're here. They're like, okay, what are they going through? Which is beautiful in a way. It allows you to build empathy, to focus on the receiver function. There are some people who are more interested in, okay, how do I hold the container really well? How do I hold the medium? Medium-based people, they're not so much interested in this. These are people who would go to you and say, okay, how are you doing? A lot of times they're not actually interested in how you're doing. They just want to open the channel so that there could be like a feeling between both of you. They're not actually listening to what you're saying. They're not, they're not interested. What they're interested in is the relationship. So sometimes it is kind of hard to answer the question like, how are you? Because, how are you is quite infinite. So some people are operating here, definitely, where they're listening to what is underlying the message. And very often, because the medium is the message, when you shift between mediums, the context will change. So if you're speaking or writing or texting the message, these are different mediums, the context will change. Now the code holds all of it from a meta perspective. The code understands the rules that allow all of language, all of consciousness to happen. So this, in a way, is deep wisdom belonging to those who have gone through so much contextualization, so much channeling, so many absorptions of message, so that they can read the room in very often like a quiet way. They're not over speaking. They're not over shaming, worrying about others. They're not overly obsessed with their notes. They're not overly worried about the channeling experience. In a way that when I say overly, it's because they're actually able to balance. Because in coding, there needs to be a hermeneutic understanding of the relationship between the parts and the whole. So if you're not coming in with confidence and strength, if you're not coming in with empathy, if you're not coming in with an understanding of what do you have to hold here, what is possible intentions, what is the question that's holding the space right now, and is it safe? Is there love? Is the space able to channel? And where do all these people, with all the information they're carrying, where does it all meet? How do I contextualize? How do I listen to the connections? And so I'm not just going to make up a whole bunch of things that are possibly interrelated, so I could just create explosions. That's what it means to learn how to code, and not just to keep holding content, and not just to hold just the medium. It's not just medium, is also very often the thing that you do. It could be your yoga, your inner dance, your breath work, because in a way that holds a container. If you're clear as well that I'm not just creating a spiritual medium or spiritual modality, but also I'm holding, I hold a message. that is meant to be received well. But what's interesting that happens here is from the deepest spiritual experience, the message, the medium, the context, the code, the receiver, and the sender, they're all becoming one. The energy is sending the message, and the message is energy, and what's receiving it is just as much energy, and the medium is made up of energy, and what's writing the rules and holding context together is energy, whatever you want to call that, like God, universe, and so on and so forth. So there really is just one big conversation happening right now. You don't cancel out the message. They're all important. And then you go into many mediums, many dimensions. You know, you go into transmedia, multidimensionality, and you know, you can each medium holds different time frames. Each dimension holds a different time perception. So if you can hold slow and fast together. Then that is what multidimensionality is about, right? So that's one way to hold the associate. How do we associate one bit of information from another? What is a boundary? Wait, what happened there? There's something here. Okay, it's lost. Boundaries of the mind. Let's open this Wikipedia entry, and then let's just read this one statement, more of just this first sentence. Boundaries of the mind refers to the degree of separateness, either thick or thin, between mental functions and processes. Are you someone who has thin boundaries, which is associated with being open-minded, artistic, sensitive, or are you thick? People with thick boundaries differentiate clearly between reality and fantasy, supposedly, and between self and the other, meaning there's a strict separation between you and me, and you need to follow the rules established by so this is interesting. So dreaming is very much to do with people with thin boundaries. They look at their dreams, they experience the dreams a lot more, possibly holding meanings, as opposed to those who maybe don't even dream that much. And people in spirituality, in all of these things that a lot of us have been interested in at one point or another, we tend to go towards that. Meaning we have thinner boundaries, and this in a way is low latent inhibition. So I think it's really interesting to understand boundaries to be something to hold association. I think we're here because we, you know, we're in this topic, which is part of the learning topic. Okay. Need to zoom out so you can see where we're at. Okay, design. We're still in hermeneutics right now. So here we talk about the senses. How are you designed? How do you design the space that's being held? What would be your understanding? Is it top down? Is it bottom up? There are different interpretations of top down, bottom up design. In AI, this is taken up. In philosophy, Daniel Dennett talks about top down design as being, let's say, the human or God would design the ecology of the planet, as opposed to bottom up would be more of the earth. Evolution designs the world. The many parts would design the whole, as opposed to someone coming from executive function would design the many parts. So I think let's start with bottom-up processing. Multisensory integration is synesthesia, basically. How are the different senses organizing how you perceive reality, right? What is synesthesia? Synesthesia is a translation process. Oh, it's happening. We need to start a new slide. It says my internet connection is unstable. Just let me know if it's bad, and I can switch to another carrier. So this is your brain. And there could be more. There could be that. There could be, and very importantly, thermoception, studies climate, hot or cold. So all of these are interrelated somehow, and synesthesia and multi-sensory integration studies that your mind is actually a unification of all these, like your awareness or your consciousness. It lies on the ability to bring all of the senses together. Okay, so in this way, this is bottom-up processing, because it's the many different parts, it's the many different sensory experiences that then establishes how you know things at the top. So top-down processing would be very different. So actually, I would go back to the one slide. I think here, like synesthesia would be bottom up, and there's this other notion neuroscientists had to propose, where maybe it's actually the concepts. It could actually be the contexts that evoke what we perceive and what we sense. Okay, so you can imagine or understand how this becomes top down. It's your ability to hold the whole that allows you to perceive different parts. And this becomes interesting. This becomes rather important in your design of the journey. So when you hold the inner dance, when you enter the room, what are you holding? You know, like, okay, you just keep practicing, you're not going to hold anything. So you become an expert on holding the various aspects of this. You have your different techniques. You're using like noise, you're using music, you're using this and that, and then you know how to hold people. You know how to position their bodies. You know how to bring about the movements, and this gets really repetitive. It doesn't matter how many times you keep conducting your sessions. You just need the tools from your backpack. Every time you walk into a space, you bring out your tools. So that's very much a bottom-up design process where all you need to do is to activate sensory registers in order for people to experience themselves as the vibration. The longer you do this, you would realize that the sounds that you're making starts to become more linguistic. You're not just doing the light language stuff. You're not just humming. You're not just toning, but you're also evoking the semantic network. The semantic network holds the network of meaning, not just the echoic network, the network of sounds that people are holding, and which may bring about the images. So what I'm saying here is eventually a lot of you would find the words, or the words would just start to come out actually. And that's part of a developmental process. And when you do that, you then would establish like a top-down approach and not just a bottom-up approach. So what I'm inspiring you here with is learn how to hold content, context, and code really well. Time is valuable. Time is infinite, but when you have an hour with 20 people, 2 hours with like 30 people, if you do your work well, you're going to be working with 100 people for like a couple of hours. You're going to have to speak to all of them as one, and you need this just as much as this and this. You need to have your notebook. You need to learn how to store your thoughts in a way that you value them, because you're channeling the space. I think one of the reasons why I was able to hold this really well is I used to be in marketing. That's what I studied when I was younger. And when you work with advertising, you're tasked to speak the message in a very, very small amount of time. So, I used to be an editor as well of other people's writing. So it's very important for me to watch the connections. It's a training that when you are exposed to a lot of things, you want to learn how to go into what's called pattern recognition. And when you do go into energy, you do start to see possible patterns, so it's not just chaos, but just like a small child would look at a cloud, those in energy would start to see images appearing here. So learning to codify, to contextualize, and not just to hold content allows you basically to hold a top-down approach. So don't just learn your tools, don't just hold your toolkit. Learn how, don't just come from a bottom-up approach. Actually do both. Hold both. So if you can combine the words with the sound, especially like within the wave, knowing, for example, when the energy starts to go down and then starts to go up and starts to go down, this would be vibration. But you want to know how to speak the wave just as much, because your ability to contextualize establishes safety. It holds also a different way of containing the space. Yeah, so I think that's kind of important. We had a call yesterday where Johanna was asking such an important question relating to intelligence. And this is really what this Zoom call like it is about. Like how do you hold the learning process, the learning experience? So when you read, her question has to do with inner dance, what's activated, the corpus callosum, so on and so forth. So let's say this is the brain. It should actually be the other way around. Let's say this is the frontal part and this is like the back part. When you read, what is activated like here? I think that's really, really interesting. When you read, there's an image. So you're reading this one, right? Pretend you're not hearing my voice as I wrote this down, that you're just using your eyes to press these interesting weird letters, R-E-A-D. So as you're watching these, already there's a part of your brain that's activating pathways that have all of these experiences of what this is. Like, what is that? Okay, that's like a shape. That's like, it's interesting. It's a shape that's actually relatable to a sound. And then when you look at this, like, what is that? That's like it's this weird squiggly thing. Okay, that's actually a sound. And so you process all of that. I was describing yesterday how I taught my daughter how to read. So when I would teach Isa, it's like I would go through all of that. Read. So in education, there's a debate as to how you teach children this. Do you go for like a whole word technique, so that to know what this is, you need to take in the whole thing all at the same time as one picture, as one image, as opposed to a whole bunch of sounds together? So it's very Egyptian hieroglyphic, if you think about it, where the Egyptians and the Chinese deal with word signs rather than sound signs. And when you go into phonetics, you would teach people to go into a sequence of sounds. So in that way, that's very synesthetic already. So for you to learn how to you need to activate your visual field, the visual cortex. Let's say it should be bigger, the occipital lobe, and then you need to activate the auditory cortex somewhere here in the temporal lobe. So when you're reading this, the first that gets activated is actually here. The image activates first, but the more you start to process it in the somatosensory cortex, so the mirror neurons are kind of interesting. Why is this important? Where the mirror neurons play a key here is for you to learn anything, the mirroring happens in two main areas of the brain and in the psyche. One is action and one is perception. So if you're exposed to children a lot, at the age of 3, I was in Finland. I was watching Johanna's children, Inka and Ava. Ava would say something and then Inka would say exactly the same thing. So that brings back Echo, who fell in love with Narcissus. Learning happens through imitation. So for that reason, a lot of you're observing when people put up their workshops, they put up their videos and people are moving their bodies, and then people are seeing that they're activating different parts of the brain and then they start to imitate, they start to copy, they start to echo what is happening. So that's the mirror neuron at work. So the question is, can a dog read? It's debatable whether a chimpanzee or a monkey can read. Some people claim they can read, but can you teach a cow how to read? Can you teach like a unicorn, if such things exist, how to read? So what did humans do? Like, what exactly is a mirroring process? What exactly is a way of seeing I don't know where to put it. Seeing content, or seeing, it's not here. Sorry, I'm gonna mess around a little bit. Sorry about this. I think maybe here somewhere. Yeah, I think top down, like this one. Concepts evoke sensory experiences. So when you think of dimensionality in this way, do you remember reading your first books until you really got into it? You know, it's like when you learn to read, it's like you enter into another world. You're not exactly hearing the sounds that are happening in the story, but you can hear them when you're inside that universe, which is in a way a virtual reality. So when you listen to stories as a small child, you were learning to go into that virtual reality space. And when you learned how to think for yourself, you actually started to create that virtual reality, which is called thought. And then when you learn to read, it's the same thing. When you learn to write, you're not taking in that virtual reality. You're learning how to create that virtual reality. So when you think about modern media, the internet, YouTube, Instagram, Wikipedia, all of these are dimensions of virtual realities. That when you look at inner dance in this way, we're actually developing a very, very deep mirroring process. And this is what I feel. This is my thought, my knowledge claim, my proposal is that we're extending our ability to mirror from a context space, and some people are working from a content space into a coding space. You know, the more we go into multi-dimensional transmedium channels and universes, there's something there that's happening that's able to spread the activation more throughout the whole brain. And that's when not even just action is leading to this. And this is why we are presenting inner dance is not just about the movements, even though it's really exciting when you watch the movie, the documentary, the video earlier. It's like, oh, okay, I want to experience that. There's actually a deeper virtuality when your body isn't moving. But then we want to understand the body movement. Is what the mirror neuron is saying is we learn to hold concepts through our ability to enact upon the world. If you're familiar with the affordance theory, let's look at that. The affordance theory of J.J. Gibson. Affordance. Let's go for the wiki on this. Affordance is what the environment offers the individual. And what I think what this really says is the environment isn't neutral, nor is affordance. see. Okay, this could be important. Humans change the environment so that we could live in it. So that, in a way, we become part of the environment and the environment becomes part of us. What affordance states is there is no separation between the environment and the self. Actions aren't just actions anymore, they're called action potentials. I want to hone into this because a lot of what I'm trying to say is in this. We're still on the question, how does learning happen, as opposed to just activation and spreading of energy. So I'm going to be giving some interesting and somewhat difficult terms here. Hebbian learning describes the first neural foundations of learning. So Hebbian is understood as when a neuron fires, and then when another neuron fires, then they wire together. Neurons that fire together wire together. So that's how you create what's called a circuit. If you don't create a circuit, then you don't create a learning possibility. So understanding how mirror neurons work, where action and perception are directly linked, think about the space that we often mention. When the baby was moving around this space already, there was actually already movements. Even as the baby is absorbing everything, passing through all these sounds, emotions, we don't think they're seeing anything. Probably they're, because they're in the dream state a lot more in the third stage of pregnancy than you will ever be when you're like here, awake. They're seeing a lot in that way. So because the baby is also moving, the baby is already conducting Hebbian learning, because as the movements are happening, the primary connections are already at work. So as we know, a baby is born with 100 billion neurons, and then you have to prune this into just 50 billion neurons. Okay, so Hebbian learning would be the first understanding of the neural mechanisms of learning. We want to establish what inner dance has to say about this. So later on, this was not enough in the neuroscience to understand how circuits are formed. So when you hear this term, maybe later on when you study cognitive science, spike timing dependent plasticity, and long-term potentiation and long-term depression, we hear this word a lot, activation. What does it mean to activate? Okay, so when it comes to activation, for you to create circuits, there needs to be an asymmetry. Sorry, there should be only one as symmetry, meaning there cannot be a equal symmetry between one neuron and the other neuron. So there has to be a directionality. On understanding how metaphor works, there's like the source, right? The source domain and the target domain, which could start from the body to something, concrete, to abstract the mind. So a connection is made. What spike time dependent plasticity realizes is there is a different timing in terms of the firing of neurons. So there's the presynaptic firing and then the postsynaptic firing. In other words, you make decisions, you make connections based upon the potentiality. This is long-term potentiation. If there's a greater potential for a neuron to send signals to another neuron in a certain direction, then you can create a circuit. There's a greater chance that you can create a circuit. But this could be firing first as opposed to this. So it depends on who fires first. It depends on who fires first. So anything that you do in the room actually can influence this. Depending on the kind of music, kind of words that you're using, you will influence how the firing would work. So initially, that could establish the short bursts of energy that could happen in a workshop through your ability to potentiate the neural link or the circuit. Okay, so based on Hebbian learning, then every time you mention specific things like these, and every time you use specific like that, and every time you evoke this, you would create a circuit. Okay, so if you're becoming more and more specific, the labyrinth, the network of all of these would become more and more specific, and sometimes you would want to keep that open to prevent addiction from happening. But this is a description of what's happening when someone is laying down and exploding in energy. What you're doing is you're firing and then you're wiring. So that's very easy to do in the short term because bursts can happen momentarily. Okay, something exploded, something went into ecstasy, and that could have lasting effects for like an hour, for like a few minutes, and then what? So learning would happen more in the long term. So that's why long-term depression and not just long-term potentiation is important. So long-term potentiation happens more when your eyes are open, when you are awake, you potentiate. But there was too much that you absorbed during the day, or even as a baby, let's say you have too much potentiated. It was important to prune. To prune is to clean up where, let's say, there's too many connections. I would like to establish a personality. I want to create a person who's more consistent and isn't just a universe. Very often you're actually doing that here when you're sleeping. Okay, so this is where it becomes really key that you make differentiations in terms of who is in the room. When it's a young person or someone like this, these beings are doing very, very different things from old people. You know, when they're asleep or when they're awake, they're doing very, very different things. Okay, so when they're sleeping, for example, and when long-term depression is happening, the role of sleep for these guys is more of how to organize, how to wire things together. These guys aren't wiring anymore because they're too wired. What they're doing is they're healing. They're repairing like all of the broken connections in that way. But I do believe that if you are able to hold a process huge and long enough, they become like this. So they too can achieve this and not just, you know. So in that way, the exploding and the blowing up and the releasing, the purgation, the emotional space is quite important so that they can also disorganize before they can reorganize. Okay, so these are just different elements in how inner dance happens within like a neural correlate. I thought like it would be really cool for you guys to think about that. That you can design your journeys depending on who's there. So um, in the beginning, just let them explode. Just let them. I mean, these guys. Just let them let go. Let them let go. But when they've unlearned what they have learned, when the relearning happens, you need to change your style. You need to change your process. This has been my primary concern. It's my project. I've been doing this a lot. I've been doing this a lot, which for me has been a long time. And to be really, really honest with you, it's really easy to lose your mind when you do this work. I've seen a lot of people lose memory. They can't remember things. It's very hard to hold the continuity of a thought. It's very easy to get distracted. And when you get used to that, it becomes the default mechanism to just spiral down out of control into the emotional, into the, however deep that could be, it could be bottomless. You actually need to have discipline to rise up, to establish like a container or kind of school for yourself. And this is the reason why I tended towards structure, knowledge systems, learning systems. It wasn't easy, and I had to find a way to discover my words again, as opposed to in the beginning when I was holding inner dance. I'd walk into a room, and then I would just start. It like my body would just start moving. So it's not like I controlled any of this. The stages, the development will really just happen. But it is helpful for me to be able to talk about this now, so that you are aware of what you're going to go through, or what you're already going through now, or what you will go through in the future. You have choices. There are different energy journeys. There are many kinds of inner dances. And so to just paint a much more complete um, um, synesthesia, all of these senses together, that's where an idea aesthesia is important. So I think that's all I have to share. That is actually quite long. Sorry about that. Almost 2 hours. Thank you for sitting with that. I guess if we're going to go into techniques still, we can do that, or we can do that tomorrow. I want to open the space for any of you who might have some questions or some reflections, some insights. I shared quite a lot today, to be honest. This is maybe the first time I'm able to sit down. Something I tried to do when we were in Turkey. Some of us were in Turkey and in Madrid. I think I tried to bring some of these up in Iceland, in Reykjavik, but there wasn't enough of a contextualization. Like, we had to go through different conversations before we can establish a greater reflexivity that looks at the inner dance mirror. So thank you for staying this long to look at this. All right. Questions, insights?
I have a question. The different forms of inner dance, I've noticed that you can do it speaking, you can do it singing. just like with the music and DJing. Are there any other forms that you've seen this days?
Okay, so I want to talk about the demo. I don't know if you know what a demo is, but it's when you put someone in the middle of the room. There are many ways to do the demo. In Maya, when we do it, like we could use sound. I think Flores here, we would work on people together, where there would be a chanting happening, there would be tapping noises. But when I'm there and when I'm holding the demo, what I use are words. For me, the most powerful tool is actually words. Here's like a way of looking at the words. So I've talked about intention in a previous voice note. What is an intention? It's like what intuition can hold a lot more that intention can't really see. There's something deeper than intention, and that is intentionality. Okay, maybe that could even transcend this circle. Intentionality is what moves the space. It is what moves your body. It's in philosophy, intentionality is the most irreducible point. So irreducibility would be, okay, if you have this and then cut that in half, and then this is what you have left, cut that in half and keep cutting everything until you can't reduce anything anymore. One of the questions in philosophy is, what is the smallest point? What is the smallest point? According to Franz Brentano, and I think Edmund Husserl, the smallest point is actually intentionality. It's the thing that moves all things. It's the most like irreducible point. So when you think of it in terms of language, what is the most irreducible point, which would be an intentionality? And there's a language, could it be a word? Is that the smallest? Or could it be like a phoneme or a morpheme? You know, like, is it the sound that you make? Is it the letter that becomes the smallest point? When you look at the intentionality, it doesn't actually have to be that. It could be the whole sentence. The sentence is in itself complete. So it sounds like each of these are irreducible and complete unto themselves. But when you look at any of these, it's complex. It's loose, it's open, it's flexible. It's in the way you combine and channel these that it becomes irreducibly complete, because you're holding the meaning. You channeled it. You arrive at the content and the context and the code all in one, which is very intuitive. So in a sense, when you start thinking, when you come from intentionality, you're already speaking the first word, and then the second, the third, the fourth, fifth, sixth will just keep on going, so that even before you completed the sentence, even as you spoke the first sound, it's already complete. So when you're coming from a lot of trust, and let's say when your audience is already quite in context, you know, they've experienced the energy, they trust the room, they trust you, allow yourself to channel this more complete space. Allow the meanings to course through, which isn't going to be you speaking. It will be the room speaking to itself. So learn how to hold like huge questions. Like, you know, someone's laying down, there could be these, okay, like, where are you from? That would evoke an action potential that's quite huge. Some people, they learn to just speak, what's your greatest fear? What are you afraid of? You know, or it could be like a parasympathetic, oh, relax, close your eyes, be present, or it could be something that evokes people, that, you know, touches the heart, that explodes and, you know, semantic networks, priming into all directions, because they're being seen, and you know, to be healed is to be seen. But for someone to speak the seeing really well, you know what it means to be supported. It's like for someone to come up to you and say, do you know how amazing you are? Do you know how powerful you are? So for me, if I had a choice between the different means, like chemicals, sounds, instruments, for me, words would be, in fact, the most irreducible ways of holding the space. And you need to be clear. You need to be really clear in order to channel. If you're not clear, at least be in a space of clarifying, of trusting, and the clarification would come through the energy wave of speaking. You know, the very act of channeling would, yeah. I hope that helps a bit.
That's happening at the end. And I guess I'm attributing it to hanging out with a whole bunch of people who are in the Akasha often. So when I'm closing, not closing, but, you know, like at the end when everyone is sharing their experience and talking about it, it just happens. Like it just happens on its own, that it's like, oh, okay, I'm supposed to tell them this or that, or and it's not even a thought. It's just like an awareness that pops in, and it comes out. During the session, that kind of conversation, I have it with their bodies, where I ask their higher self, and I guess their higher selves and their bodies to become one in a way. And when I get close to a person, instead of doing something right away, I ask, how can I serve? How can I be of assistance with whatever it is that you're going through? And it feels like it's their body telling me rather than their mind. And from there, I touch, or I don't, or I walk away, or whatever it is that it's supposed to happen. But I do hear when it comes to words, there's something having a conversation there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I really like this question and where it went, actually. Like channeling speaks a lot about this. You know, sometimes when the words don't come, we become quite judgmental against ourselves. Like, okay, I'm stuck, I'm blocked, I don't know what to say. But very often it's actually because of the environment. Like when there's a lack of trust and the channel hasn't opened, the content will not flow through. And you know how it is when you trust people and when they trust you, the information just flows. So sometimes we use the energy process in order to create that opening, and the information would flow. So I think it depends on how we're holding the information. To be in a teaching space, we just issue statements that would be teaching. It would be didactic. It would be, right now in the education system, teachers are giving way to more like facilitators. And facilitators don't give statements. What they do is they ask questions so that the information would come up from the people themselves, which could be in the form of the body movements, like light language, but eventually understanding ideesthesia or top-down approaches. To give an example of this, sometimes people have these visions, and it could be like a flower. It could be like people see like the womb or even the mother's vagina, and then they enter that, and you know, it could be really graphic. They can see a heart. Very often people see an eye. So we reflect upon that, are they really just seeing an image? Understanding ideesthesia, what we get there. Let's go look at that. It's really quite an interesting concept. Ideesthesia. So it does come out of synesthesia. If synesthesia means the union of the senses, ideesthesia is more of what's activated is the concept. The concept induces what would become the sensory experiences. So when people see an image, what this is saying is they're actually seeing more of the concept, which is a condensation of many things. So the words are really more of a servant to what is there. I brought Flor and Serena once to the indigenous, to the tribes in the southern Philippines, in Mindanao. And one of the things they taught us, the shaman taught us, is the tribal people are very clear as to the question that's being asked in the room. And sometimes that could be a vibratory question, but they do have an awareness that there's a question being asked. And everything that will be channeled in the chant or what will be spoken will be based on that question. It's not a mental question. It's almost like a retrocausality where the answers are already there, but they need to hold a question in order to contain the space. So in a way, the tribes are more facilitators than teachers. And they know when the question had shifted. When it's another question, there's a whole different conceptual domain or dimension, or there's the different, like for me, what I notice is I have different ways of speaking. I can speak with a certain tone or texture, and sometimes I don't like that tone or texture. So I've been working on that tone and texture so that it would go into a more objective, less shame, less, like entangled type of speaking, so I could draw from more resources. So I work in that dimensionality, and there's a way I can use the tone in my voice to go there. And I'm very sensitive. I can, so I need to work on it. I really need to go into a humbling space, and then a wisdom space, and then an active space. I need to work with my body, my mind, my emotions, and my language all at the same time. Yeah, I think, yeah, we're using all of them. So anyway, thank you. Other people?
If I may say something around developing those skills, yes, when people say words, it comes with information that it's vibration, that it holds data. But it takes the receiver that begins to see that information to do their inner work. So it's not seeing through the filter of emotions, and it's not seeing through the filter of their present reality, rather than seeing the filter of the other person, or the reality of the other person, rather than sifting through the reality of the receiver. And that's that's the inner dance, right? Like doing that kind of work.
Yeah. When I go back to this, when I remember what it was like for me finding words, what makes the inner dance is in the beginning retrocausality, so that there could be so many misinterpretations of using words when we're not coming from actually that inner dance energy that speaks from something much bigger than where we're normally speaking from. It's like speaking ahead what it already knows, just like when we touch people and the way we hold people, there's this congruence, correspondence, and coherence that it just holds a lot, all in one togetherness. So that's why I'm also coming from, like, you would know when you're like channeling, which is in a way when you're touching people, it's because that person is touching herself through you, and then that's the feedback they give, that that's exactly what I needed. How did you know, how did you speak that? So in a way, we have to kind of die in order to listen, and that's how we're using the vibratory space. What I do observe is some people can actually read. There is this ability to read other people. I'm not going to create a judgment call whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, because sometimes when you read too much, what you're reading is just a trace, which isn't always holding the entire wave. But sometimes there are modes of reading, though, that would condense quite a lot and not just go too much into a psychism where, okay, I want to read your future, but the future hasn't been written yet. You want to hold it in a grander potentiality. So, yeah, I think this is really tricky, but at the same time, I think we understand because we've operated in so many dimensionalities how to refine almost like a different language that's coming through now. I just do know people are speaking differently, and it's because probably the mirror neuron system that's activating now is really spread out, and to just come from deep respect of the energy that's facilitating a lot of this. um, we do know that right now a lot of people have to start with the body first, from the bottom up, from synesthesia, and then an ideesthesia would later on come, because, like when they say women think from their gut, the body seems to be a lot wiser than the mind, and like language is a servant of the mind very often. So when we do contextualize words like through the inner dance experience, it's actually a whole different thing altogether. So I can only begin to kind of describe it. I can't really explain it entirely, but it does help people to hear some of this, so that when this starts to come up through them, because they're learning to trust themselves, and others are trusting them, and then they're trusting others, all of which are important, a language really comes up. And I think that's to do with the stages of development that happens both in a child and someone who's becoming like a child and then is growing up like a universe. Thank you. Okay, Floor, I'm really expecting you to join us. You have a raised hand.
You just brought a lot of memories. Wait, Andrea, I'm not talking to you. Now I just want to add, it's a very interesting topic that was brought up, and it's actually so exciting for me to be listening to you, Pai, with all your new way of bringing about this information. I was just telling Andrea, I've been looking at this concept since 5 years ago from the old videos and stuff, and with all these images and the cool drawings, like things are becoming, I know for people who are listening to this very new, it's still hard to grasp, but it's amazing how they're becoming more and more simplified, but deep at the same time. I'm just excited to share a little bit about the ability to be able to channel the room. And this is usually the challenge of a lot of new facilitators. I cannot speak, or I cannot, I don't know what to say. The way I've always seen inner dance is like the moment we enter the room is like, it's like you're in a cauldron and it's a soup, and all the ingredients are already there and all the informations are already there. And um, there's one technique that I learned over the years. I didn't know it in the beginning, but because I'm very visual, internally visual, so, but it took me a long time before I could trust that. And sometimes I'm also very auditory, so I can kind of hear the journeys of people and the visuals that they see. And by the way, I remembered what you said about some people who can read. I stopped answering people when they asked me, did you see my journey, or what did you see? And like, I kind of um stopped encouraging that question to me, because being able to read or see or hear the people's journey, it's important for us to be able to translate it in such a way that the person will not go into the story in a more just personal way, so anyway, that's just a side note. So one of the things I've noticed over the years is that images and words or concepts or even stories, like, they start popping up, especially if I walk around the room. So different bodies around me brings about different images and different information. And it's the ability to trust. And as Pai said, when there's trust from the people and trust from the facilitator itself to the self and to the people and to the room. And that's the most important thing that we get to learn to establish before anything begins in the journey, is that trust thing. When things start popping in the air, so it's like a big cauldron, it's a big soup, and ingredients start popping, I learned to just say any of that, even if it doesn't make sense at all. Like suddenly um, a dolphin appears, or a broom appears, or whatever. And over time, for facilitators, you'll realize that that's exactly where, as retrocausality is always in the space, that's exactly where that person where I'm walking towards is experiencing or seeing. So that's one thing that I'd like to add in this conversation, that when there's so much trust in the space, it's almost like the bodies are spilling out information, and that the information is kind of like dancing in the air, and the facilitator can establish and practice into actually picking them up and saying them even in the most random way. I found it very, very powerful. And that's almost like how retrocausality is being modeled so strongly in an inner dance space. Yeah.
Yeah, this is really, yeah, it's everything. There's no training. There is no such thing as an inner dance training. We stopped calling it that in 2013, and we called it energy school, because the energy is the student and the teacher and the curriculum and the classroom. So the question people ask is, how do you know what to say? How do you know what to do? My only answer from experience is, the reason I'm doing it is because I'm doing it. That's retrocausal. That is very trusting. I mean, I'm doing it also not because it's what is being done at the moment, because there's always a way in which consciousness integrates everything that it is into a word or an action or a touch. like all of these things are embodying like all of it. So in what were the trainings in the past, we just get people to do it, just do it. And when you're doing it, and when you're in trust, you're doing it because you can't even say you have to do it. It's just what is happening at the moment. And because it's so rare that we end up in such a trusting space, and because we're creating all these conditions where like so much trust could happen, other people would feel it, what you're feeling. So like reflecting on what Flora is saying, it could be anything. Actually, it could be any image, it could be any word. It almost doesn't matter, because if each word actually holds context and code, every person, every word, every room, every day is a universe, and you're coming from that. So language would really just form, just like in a baby that goes into language acquisition later, that learns to speak for itself because it absorbed so much. You can't actually plan. You don't need to keep developing like a battle plan or like a work plan. So, okay, in the beginning, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to breathe, I'm going to look at everyone mysteriously, and I'm going to start to do this exactly in this way, how I learned it from like someone else. You can start with any one particular point, and when that point holds the whole network, that means that you are just trusting. And that doesn't need to be intense. That could be really, really simple. People would trust it if they know you're coming from somewhere. If they know that you're coming from an experience, and you're there, you're settled, you're holding, you're being held, and they know that you're there for play, but for something serious. It will just come. Um, so in that sense, there's no rules. We have seen the craziest, weirdest, strangest things, and the thing is, all of it has been allowed, and because anything can happen, anything will happen in an inner dance process. Thank you, Flora. Anyone else?
Yeah, Pi, it's Kim. I want to share something when I was listening to Flor. I'm not using like really understandable words at the moment. So it happened 2 times. But what I find remarkable in the way that I am experiencing the participants in an individual way is that it's like I'm translating their vibrations through the tone of my voice and the loudness of the way I use my voice. So sometimes I'm super hard, speaking really hard, like harsh, and it's then I can feel that there's a lot of anger, and then I just go 1 meter away, go to the other person, and I start like I'm really like nourishing them and singing lullabies. And so for me, like that is my level where I guess I'm at with how I channel these people's journeys. Yeah, but that's what I wanted to share about the way I'm experiencing it now. So thank you.
Totally. This is really what hermeneutics is about, or more specifically, the Hermeneutic Circle, um, which is the relationality between the parts and the whole. So let's say you start from an empty space, and you're holding the bigness of it all quietly, just through presence. Um, and everything that you do now becomes like a part. So it's the same way as, let's say, you're reading a book or you're watching a movie. In the beginning, you're watching the movie, then each moment is a part, and then the more you get to understand the movie. But you can't really understand most movies without having have understood the gist. So maybe you looked at the poster, maybe you saw like a trailer, so at least you know something about that movie, because why else would you be like devoting like time to that? A lot of movies that come out now, if it's worth watching, it's 3 hours long. So you must have known something about that in gist for you to then go through the different parts. So how the hermeneutic circle works is the more you understand the parts, a sense of wholeness comes in, and that's what space holds. And so the more you hold the space, the more you understand the parts. Where the wave comes in is, and you see it in many aspects of life, let's say in a conversation or a dialogue, when you're in a dialogue with someone who's not really in total trust, there's like a wave that you have to take them through where it goes up and then it goes down and it goes up. It's like a dance. So when you're holding the process in this way, you need to hold the hermeneutic circle. And that could talk about delta and gamma, or that could talk about rest and active, and that can talk about the left or the right hemisphere. That could talk about the personal or the global. For you to hold one is then to hold the other. You can't actually hold the positive without the negative. You can't hold light without dark. Sometimes you need to create the dark in order for something to shine, or something needs to start from something super bright in order for someone to feel safe enough and brave enough to go into the dark night or the dark side of the moon. So as a space holder, this is what you do when you hold the field. People need enough of the whole for them to hold some of the parts, which you will unravel in language. And so as they feel the words, they're also feeling the wholeness. So that's why you also really need to hold yourself before you enter the space, because you're already channeling just through intention and intentionality and intuition. Just ending up in that situation means a dialogue is being held somehow, and people are about to speak to themselves through you. They're about to use you as a channel or a medium. So when you empty, you actually become full, because slowly you would get impressions. But then when you get support, let's say you belong to an interpretive community that allows you to see many parts, and this is one of the reasons why we're holding these online processes, so that you can, dialogue from Bohm is about learning to hold the shared space so that you can slow down the runaway thinking process that has so many layers about it, that you can suddenly see the layers, and it becomes like, okay, it's like as each word unravels, like, okay, I can see how things are organized now. You're listening to people and it's doing something inside your head where it's moving things around, putting things in folders and boxes, organizing things. So the more you do this, the more you keep holding the hermeneutic circle, you actually become very organizing. The more you learn how to hold layers, especially, you can organize like more. So I think that's what you're doing, really. You're like holding the puzzle. Just give them enough, just a little bit, enough of the whole, and then just enough pieces and then they would unravel that from inside. They themselves need to be the ones to rearrange parts and whole in themselves. Yeah. Anyone else would like to share anything or hold a question? Yeah, I guess we could call it a day. So we unpacked a lot. Um, we opened a lot of folders. And just what we're looking at is learning. Like how does learning happen? In inner dance, the Hermeneutic Circle begins to explain that the neural structure of inner dance helps to hold that. Um, so we're recording these calls, and they are, in a way, the best way to write the book. It's very hard to jot these down in the written word because the knowledge is so cross conceptual, transmedium, multidimensional. So even me, in preparation for all of these Zooms, I actually have to really zoom in and zoom out. And the work consumes me. Like the whole week, I'm holding all of these pieces, some of which seem complex, some of which seem simple. But this is what makes writing and a lot of other mediums like songwriting, any kind of composition work. You can compose a song, a poem, a novel. It becomes really hard for most people to learn these art forms because to channel means to commit. Like why would it be that word or that movement? Why would it be, So you can do that artistically, scientifically, philosophically, spiritually. It depends on your life purpose, what you're holding in subjective and objective ways. So when that's why that's how Prezi, this platform that I've been using, it's been so helpful. Just like when we were in Europe early this year, I was using Keynote, which is Apple's version of PowerPoint, to be able to work with the image and not just with the sound. For those who were part of these online journeys, 3 years ago, we weren't even using videos, meaning we're just talking to each other with the video cameras off because everything was super just vibrating. It was clear in a different way, and this is very clear and also in a different way. So there's a synesthesia happening where words, sounds, and images and movements are now kind of coming together. And it takes a tremendous, it's quite tremendous to be able to hold this many pieces that, that unravels this, not just for you. A lot of the work that we're doing is situated so that the world would be ready for this at a time when contextualization and coding is needed. Were we to hold responsibly this really mysterious work, how will it become safe for children, for patients in hospitals, and just almost anyone, almost everyone. So you're part of the study group because you are a student of energy that is learning to develop systems of interpretation from many dimensions and not just from the energetic. The energetic holds the non-structure. Everything is true, everything's amazing, everything's beautiful. But once you bring this into application, when your energy yourself speaking to the world, you have to commit to the world that you chose, and it comes with its own metaphysics of presence. It comes with its own paradigms and structures that would be changing with you. You are then taking that much responsibility. So don't get overwhelmed if you don't understand everything all at the same time. We're recording these, and these are mediums. Um, they will become really helpful once you come into the situation where you yourself are holding. So you would do just exactly what I'm doing, which is the ability to take a lot energetically, informationally, and bring up a kind of narrative about the human condition, human consciousness, humans as meaning making, significating beings, like we're designing a reality inside and outside, from the bottom up and from the top down. um, like the new human beings are not going to be satisfied with just the many parts that are being accumulated um, right now. The question is, okay, we know so much, how do we integrate that within the experience, but also within stable, wakeful, conscious states? Um, so yeah, we wish for you to develop a discipline to go to the energy school, to to be able to function in the world as a highly intelligent, wise being. Um, so thank you for sitting with these, especially the brain parts, especially the brain parts. It's it really is quite a thing to understand the quadrillion connections that are like firing every day. The living representations that model these are actually quite simple when you think about them. It's just firing and wiring and directionality of how things fire, and how you just need to hold repetitions on what holds the highest essence of you, as opposed to firing just what is addictive and what is pain avoidant and what is pleasure seeking, what is looking for comfort. Um, just giving you a lot more access, which reflects who you really are as a person, as a planet. That's the reason why we're not simplifying inner intensive. We call it that because for a lot of people, the inner is intense. What you would like to hold is more of the inner is also intensive, integral, integrative, holistic. And for that to happen right now, you need to be a linguist, partly a neurologist, a psychologist, a philosopher, an anthropologist who studies the human, a philosopher of time and space, someone interested in the arts, especially music, someone who's interested in body as a language system, to become like a polymath is one who has many skills. A polyglot is someone who can speak many languages, languages of different senses, sensory modalities. So when you listen to me, someone like me speak, I am a product of the energy, meaning I found my vocabulary through the energy. But in the beginning, I really could not speak. I couldn't think. I was just space, which meant that I was spacey, and I had a hard time contextualizing. I would just bring about trust and see what happens. But more and more, as the energy grows, your Broca's area will activate once more, and you will be able to hold just more pieces together. You can hold a tonality and a texture in your language that's holding objectivity, to be able to see the world as it is in a multi-layered way, Humans and animals are born into the ecosystem, which is complexity. And modern humans have tried to do away with complexity so that we can control the earth, and we've lost our nature, we've lost our instinct. Animals may not think and speak the way we do, but they have an intelligence. We need to borrow some of human intelligence and borrow some of the animal instinct and kind of bridge all of those together. So, which is to say, a lot of what we share isn't coming just from science. A lot, or maybe everything that we're sharing, came from the energy itself. The energy is a school, it's a teacher, and it's a student. And I think when we get out of the way, our fear, our emotions are really just like signaling systems. When we're overwhelmed, when there's something bigger that our minds can process, emotions come up. I'm not against emotions, but emotions are really just a movement from one state to another. Once you achieve stasis or stability, which you do deserve as well, you will experience another kind of emotion where there's something not in motion still holding the movements within a contained space. So take your time, especially right now. It's solstice. The longest and shortest day of the year is happening right now. A lot of people would rather not be in this space right now we're in. They'd rather be in some kind of party. Thank you for being here. A decade after the end of the Mayan calendar. So if you could unmute and help me close. Thank you, thank you. Good night, good morning, good afternoon.
This is the party pie.
Same. Love to Costa Rica. Amazing. Love to Andre.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye,
See you
everyone.
again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Happy solstice, everyone.
Oh, yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.